Hi, I'm Jay, and today I'm tying something for ice fishing, the Red Tail Ice Jig. Stay tuned. So, good evening. We are at the bench today, and I'm tying something, kind of just filling my box for the ice season. I know it's only November. We have the Thanksgiving holiday that's coming up, but soon it will be Christmas time, and soon local lakes and ponds will be frozen over, and I'll be sitting out on a bucket. So what we're doing today is a favorite jig of mine. I do it in a few different combinations, a few different sizes, but I go through a whole bunch of them every year because I will stand at a hole and catch bluegill after bluegill with the Red Tail Ice Jig. Today, so in the vise I have a 190 gold-plated jig head, and just to give you a reference, here's the eraser to a pencil, and it dwarfs this jig. And to get started, I'm using a 3/0 brown nylon. It's unwaxed. And I lock the thread on right above the hook point with a few wraps towards the bend of the hook. And what we're going to use is a dyed, I like to use a dyed turkey feather, but because the size of this jig is so tiny, what I'm using in its place is just a dyed duck wing feather. So I strip a few of the fibers from the base of the duck feather, and I want to tie these in the length of the body. Past the bend of the hook will be the size of the tail. So I can switch my grip, just hold this into place, and just lock this on right on top of the hook shank with a few wraps towards the bend of the hook. Because they extend past the head, I'm going to just trim these away. If the butt ends ended right here, I would just leave it, because we're going to, with open wraps, just walk your thread up to the head, and then with open wraps you can walk your thread back just above the hook point. The chenille body I'm using is a crystal braid, purple black, from Barlow's Hackle. And the color is kind of interesting. Purple black, of course, but there's also some flash in here. A little bit of green, a little bit of gold, a little bit of silver, depending on how the light hits it. And I'm going to lock it on right above the hook point. Typically, I would strip some of these fibers just to expose the thread core, but the black is kind of braided into that core, so I can't really strip that away, but we can just lock it on as normal. A few wraps towards the bend of the hook, and then crossing back over, walking it up to the head. And I'm going to wrap away from me, the first wrap kind of going towards the 11 o'clock position, and then as I come around I'll straighten it out. And then with touching wraps, all my wraps will go between the head and the jaws of my vise. And then on my final wrap around, I'm going to angle my chenille so it goes to the outside of my bobbin. So when I switch hands, I can just pick up my bobbin and lock this right into place. and then I can trim away the end. Very simple. That's a very pretty jig as is. But to finish this off, I have a... Now don't use your fancy Hackle. This is just a cheap Rooster streamer neck. Very inexpensive. And since this is a size 10 hook, I'm going to use the smaller feathers at the very bottom. What actually is the top of the cape, actually, right? And I'm just looking for a feather that when wrapped around the hook, the feather fibers are about 1, maybe 1.5 the size of the hook gap. So we want the tips of the hackle fibers to extend past the hook point just a little bit. To prepare this, I just snip the end, and then I can splay out the feathers at the bottom so I can trim them like so. That just gives me something to tie onto. I lock this on like so with just a few wraps, and with my hackle pliers I want to make at least 3 wraps. The first 2, again just like with the chenille, between the bobbin and the jaws of the vise. Then on the 3rd time around, I bring it to the outside of my bobbin, so when I switch hands and pick up my bobbin, I can lock everything into place. And I'm angling my bobbin so the thread rides along the head of the jig to help get in front of those fibers and push them back. Now that looks pretty clean, but as we look at this, I will double check, and if we have any fibers that are trapped forward, you can just take an X-Acto knife and just cut those right off. But that looks pretty good. It looks like I did a nice job. So to finish this off, we can use our whip finish tool, since this is such a small jig. The only thing you'd want to be careful of is where the eye of the hook is. So I'm dragging my whip finish tool. I pulled it down low just so I wouldn't catch that hook eye, and it does look like I did trap a couple fibers. So let's take a look at that. This is something that just happens. Can we see these fibers that are sticking out just in the front? They kind of extend past the eye of the hook. Very simple. It's only a few fibers. And all we're going to do is, with our X-Acto knife, I just kind of trap it against the head, and then I can roll the knife back and forth just to cut those away. And like I said, we could leave those totally fine. But there's the front view. Very pretty jig. Those fibers will shake in the water as you jig it ever so lightly. The tail also will move slightly as you jig it very gently. And what we're fishing for is perch, bluegill, crappie. And I tie these in sizes from 190, 160, 1/32, 1/16, 1/8. And the same techniques that we use, the same steps, from tail to chenille body to a collar. You can do those same steps in with a little bit bigger jig for tying a simple crappie jig. And that's all we're doing. We're just tying a crappie jig on a tiny, tiny head with a little bit of tinsel that we're using for ice fishing. So, and I think that will do it for us tonight. I know it's only Thanksgiving weekend, but my thoughts are already going forward, looking forward to those really cold months where we walk on the hard water and pull fish through the ice. Really hoping we have a really cold winter. Maybe it's been a few years now, but occasionally we get to fish here in New York State mid-December if we're lucky. So fingers crossed. So I'll be tying some of those other sizes, again, filling my personal tackle box. As always, hit that like button and subscribe so you don't miss any new content. Check out the website, jworthhandtied.com. So keep tying, and until next time, tight lines.